And this was, the message I wanted to share with you was my New Year's message. So I hope that's okay. We're into February. To me, it's still the beginning of the year. This was the sermon that I had prepped to speak in January. But then when we got a call and we were told that our new conference president was going to speak, and that the only time he could do that was on the Sabbath that I preached, I'm like, by all means, let's hear from our new president his passion and his vision for the conference. So I think it was a good, how many were here last Sabbath to hear him? Just a powerful message, and I hope you were blessed. So this morning, again, this is my New Year's sermon, and it's so fitting that Christina picked that song because the future sometimes does seem fearful, so uncertain. I want to start us, those of you know that I usually speak at children's church, and then I usually preach a similar topic so that our kids can re-engage, hopefully from what they heard in children's church to what they hear in the main sanctuary the following time I speak. So, any kids out there guess what we're going to speak about today? What was the last? Pastor Ben actually spoke because I was away at my unit. Any of the kids remember? There were 12 specific people that went to do what? Yeah, Jasenia. They went out to spy on the land. Good job. So that's what we're going to be talking a little bit about today. But before I start that, I want to read a little movie clip for you. It's entitled Black Knight, and it's from, I guess, a movie called Search for the Holy Grail. So let me read this part to you because it's going to tie into what we're talking about. So in the film The Black Knight, King Arthur is traveling through the forest when he enters a clearing and observes two knights fighting, a black knight and a green knight, and they're battling back and forth. And then finally, the black knight overtakes the green knight and wins. So the king walks up to these two knights and he says, "Wow, congratulations." He's like, "You are so good, I want you to be one of the knights at the round table." To that which the black knight just stood there and didn't acknowledge what the king was saying at all. See, the black knight was the one that protected this bridge that went across just this very little space like this. But he took his job seriously. So much so that when the king said, "May I pass?" he said, "None shall pass." And he told the king that with a very serious face. And so the king said, "Well, do you realize who I am? I am the king. Allow me to pass." And the king says, "None shall pass." To at this, the king drew his sword and they began to battle. The King Arthur and, in this movie, this Black Knight. And they battled, and then finally the king prevailed, and he actually took the arm of the Black Knight off, the left arm. And so the king thought the battle was over. And so the Black Knight got up, he was injured, and the king was getting ready to now pass, and the guy stood in the way again of the bridge. And the king says, "Well, surely the battle is over. I have won." He said, This is merely a flesh wound." And so then he takes the sword in the other hand, and the battle begins again. This happens 4 times. Well, finally, the king has prevailed so much that the man is no longer able to walk. He's been cut in the legs, the arms. When I read this, I'm like, that's pretty gruesome. But there's a point. And so, and each time the man is injured, he just says, "Oh, this is merely a scratch." And he's armless, and now he's got no legs because he's been cut in the legs. And so the king said, the battle is over. Matter of fact, he's bowing down to pray, as a king would do in battle, for thanksgiving, for deliverance. And the man kicks him. And he said, the guy is still wanting to fight. So finally the king, again, took him down to almost nothing. And each time the man would say, "Come back," as the king began to walk past, because the man could no longer fight. The king is walking across, and the man says, "Come back." And the king's like, "It's over. Come back, you coward." He's telling this to the king, and he says, "What are you going to do to win? Are you going to bleed on me?" And the man says, "No, come on. I will bite your legs off," he says. And what we see in this little story is what I want to talk about today. This man was oblivious to his condition. He was oblivious. Matter of fact, psychology will tell you, as you read psychology, as I was preparing for this in some of the journals, they actually use this as an example. That's why I felt safe to use it, because they actually called it minimization, minimizing your condition or the issues. And it's actually a cognitive thing where we realize we don't understand the danger or what's going on, and we minimize the things that are happening. Now, what is the opposite of minimization? I'll tell you. Most of the time it's with a fish story. Have you ever heard a fish story? I remember telling my first fish story. I went with my buddies. I caught a fish that was this big. By the time I got home to tell my dad, guess how big the fish was? Like this big. So why do we exaggerate? Why? Or why do we minimize the things that are going on in our lives? So let's turn to the Bible this morning to Numbers 13. And this is where our story started in children's church. This is where we'll start our sermon this morning. Numbers 13. And you're all familiar with the story, so I'm not going to go into a huge detail. But what I do want to show you is that in Deuteronomy 1, we have the same thing being told. And this is Moses' major speeches and everything. In Deuteronomy, it actually dictates what's going on between the first generation of Israelites that came out of Egypt, the second generation. So in Numbers 13, is that the first generation of Israel or the second? It's the first, okay? These are the ones that were about to go into the promised land. The promised land. This is the land they've been told they're going to inherit. God is going to deliver, and they are going to walk into this land. Now we know that the Israelites had had many battles. God had done some pretty amazing things, parting the Red Sea, turning bitter water into drinkable water. All these things God had been doing for the children of Israel. So here they come to the land, and in Deuteronomy 1, it says something interesting. Verse 13 here of Numbers first, it says that the Lord spoke to Moses saying, send men to spy out on the land. So in Numbers 13, it says God said go. But in Deuteronomy 1, it recalls Moses recalling what happened, and they wanted to spy out the land. They wanted to send a scout party to go check it out first before they got in. Why do you think they did that? Because they did not trust God. God had been delivering them time and time again. And here we still see the issue going on in the Israelites. They did not trust God. And so God gives in to their lack of trust. He says, fine. And in Numbers 13, he says, allow 12 spies to go and check out the land. See that it is good. And so what were the response? Let's look at what they say when they come back. So for 40 days, they're checking it out. They're spying. They're seeing what's going on in the land. And this is their report when they come back. 26. Numbers 13, 26. Now they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness. They brought back the word to them and to all the congregation and showed them that the fruit of the land. Then they told them and said, we went to that land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites were there in the land. The Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea along the banks of the Jordan. Then Caleb steps up, because there were 12, right? We had 10 that kind of give this report. Oh, this is, and then we had 2 that said, let's do this. So Caleb interrupts, quiets the people before Moses said, let's go up at once and take possession, for we are able to overcome. But the other spies get in and they say, but whoa. We're not able to go up against this people, for they are stronger than we. Verse 32. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone to spy is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it were of great stature. There we saw giants. The descendants of Anak came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in their own sight. So what do we have happening here? You think a little bit exaggeration? Giants! Well, they were. They were big people. But what were they comparing themselves to? Grasshoppers. So were they minimizing? Were they exaggerating? And again, why do we do that? Why do we exaggerate? When my mom told me the snake story when I went out, remember the snake story? She exaggerated because it was for fear. She was overcome by fear. And the moment you're afraid of something, your perception, all these things, and it's actually a chemical reaction, because there's either the fight or the what response? Flight. And so things start happening, you become filled with adrenaline, and you're ready to either fight or let's get out of here. And so your perception is off, all these things start to happen. So I think a lot of us exaggerate because of fear. Then there are others that will exaggerate for a response. Remember, I don't know if you ever watch sports, but have you ever been watching a basketball game and one of the guys will get his hand hit, but he'll fall to the ground. Oh! What's he doing what's he trying to get the ref to do? Call a foul. And so he's acting out all this dramatic for a response. I'm not saying those are bad responses. I'm just saying, why do we exaggerate? Why did the children of Israel exaggerate? And they did it so much so that they finally go and said, we're not going into the land that God has promised. They literally told God, hey, we know you've promised this to us, but you know what? We are so overcome with our fear and these giants that we are not going to go forward. And so God then says, fine, you did not want to go into this land that I've promised, so for every day that you've been spying, you will now wander in the wilderness for 40 days. For 40 days. Except for the two. Who are the two that said, yeah, we can do this? Let's look at it. So Israel refuses, but let's see what Joshua and Caleb say. And they spoke to the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, the land we passed through to spy out is so good, so good. And if the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into his land and give it to us as he has promised. I've titled my sermon this morning, My God is Dependable. My God is dependable. Do you believe that? So this morning my question to you is, what giants are you facing? What are the things standing in your way for God to lead and bless you? So Jeremiah talks about God has this plan for us, plan to give us a future and a hope. Jeremiah 29. But sometimes our fears stand in the way of what God has in store for us as a people. Whether we exaggerate the issues that we have. I pulled Facebook this week, and I was pretty amazed at the honesty and what people told me. I gave some friends, some people in my Facebook a chance to kind of talk about their giants in their lives. And so they inboxed me. And they stood out and they said, my friend, here are the giants in my life. We want to have children so bad, and for some reason we can't. We want to have children so bad and we can't. Others said, I fight depression. Depression is my giant. Just yesterday, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there is a famous BMX biker who gave in to that battle. His giants overcame him. From the outside looking at him, he won awards as one of the best BMX bikers. He was at 40-some years old. And just yesterday, he gave in to depression, and he took his own life. What giants are you facing? Sometimes when we look at our giants, we minimize. Oh, it's not that bad. This is not really a problem I have. I can overcome this on my own. What are we doing? We're minimizing our giants. And what tends to happen then is we feel that we can then fight our own fight, overcome those giants. But what happens? We fall, we fail, and we become overcome by guilt and failure. And then other of us, we exaggerate our giants, so much so that we realize, but I want to tell you right here, I think God gave the Israelites an opportunity to see those giants. And here's why. He wanted them to realize that they could not do it on their own. They could not overtake. And battle after battle, he had been leading them. You know the famous Battle of Jericho. Was there a sword unsheathed in that battle? No. Who fought that fight? And so we see that further on in Joshua, right? God fought the battle. God fought the battle. And I want to say, as you read Numbers and Deuteronomy and Judges, and Joshua and Judges, the Israelites kept not fighting their giants. God says, take all the inhabitants And what did they do out of fear? They did not progress. They did not go in. Matter when you talk about Joshua's legacy, as you look at his battle record, there was one place where he did not overthrow, Gath. And this morning we're going to look at another battle of a giant. And guess where he came from? Gath. His name was Goliath. Goliath of Gath. So we see, when we do not face our giants, they will come back time and time and time again. I don't know what giants you're going to face this new year. Maybe it's a giant you've been facing all along. But God wants to fight the battle. So let's look at David and Goliath this morning as we kind of progress all the way from Numbers, fast forward. It's some 300 years, okay, in 1 Samuel, when Joshua had already overtaken Jericho. So now we see in Samuel, we see another giant coming onto the stage. Who is it? Goliath. Over 9 feet tall, he stood. Over 9 feet tall. The armor that he wore was 125 pounds just in weight. This was a big guy. His shield was so big, he needed a shield bearer to carry his shield for him around. All right, so this was a big, big guy. Now, he had been for 40 days pacing back and forth in front of the Israelite army twice a day, coming and taunting them. Come on and fight me. Fight me, and if anybody wins, we will become your slaves. But if we win, you will become our slaves. So for 40 days, twice a day, Goliath would come out. There were no Hebrew volunteers until this day. Let's check it out. 1 Samuel 17 is where we begin. So David, the youngest, would bring the food to his brothers who were in Saul's army. And one day he came and he heard this Goliath of a giant standing up and mocking the God of Israel. And he says, "Who is this man that mocks our God?" Nobody said anything. Nobody said anything. Well, he is the one that's been coming out. But they were focused on their giants. They were focused on the giant. Until today. See, Goliath sees David, and what does he see when he finally realizes that this little young boy, shepherd boy, is going to come? He starts calling him names. What is this but a twig that you give me that I'm going to fight this young boy? And if you didn't know the ending of the story, let me ask you a real honest question. What odds would you give David against Goliath? 0. Let me ask you this. What odds do you give yourself against your giants? Similar? Similar odds? Pastor Matt, you have no idea. I have been fighting this for years. This giant has tormented me for years. And I've been falling and falling. He has been winning. It has been winning time and time again. Well, I want to tell you, this year can be different. This year can be different. So let's look at this story of David really quickly. Max Lucado puts it like this in his book, Facing Your Giants. Your Goliath does not carry a sword or a shield. He brandeth blades of unemployment, abandonment, sexual abuse, or depression. Your giant does not parade up and down the hills of Allah, but through your office, through your bedroom, through your classrooms. He brings bills you cannot pay, grades you cannot earn, people you cannot please, whiskey you can't resist, pornography you cannot refuse, a career you cannot escape, a past you cannot shake, and a future you don't want to face. Maybe those are your giants. See, again, for 40 days, twice a day, Goliath came out. He stole all the hope that the Israelite army had. Stood there, stole their hope. They felt defenseless. They felt abandoned. They felt like, how can we do this? Does your giants do the same? Is your giant the first thought you have when you wake up in the morning? Is it the last thought you have before going to bed? How you fell yet again to your giant. Your Goliath is dominating your day, and he's stealing your joy. See, the giant caused the Israel army to be terrified in verse 11. They lost all hope, the Bible says. Do you feel the same way? I know I did. I remember when I had graduated from my master's, a lot of you have heard this testimony, but I felt utterly helpless. I had a baby on the way, a 2-year-old. I was trying to provide for my family. I had no job. I had to do some really shady things with my truck. I was trying to pay on my loan for my Toyota Tundra, and I remember I would get knocks at the door. Knocks at the door. They were coming to repossess my truck, the only vehicle I had. And so one time I remember talking to my in-laws and saying, well, I wasn't really honest with them either, I have to say. And I feel bad for that. But I said, we're going back to Michigan, and my truck is not 4-wheel drive. Can I borrow your truck? I remember recalling saying, can I borrow your truck? It's 4-wheel drive. You can keep my new truck here in this beautiful state that is not Michigan, because they're not going to come looking at other states for my truck. So I remember telling a lie to my in-laws and so I said, this 4-wheel drive will do really well in Michigan. Sure, Matt, you can take it. And I remember the guy come to the door when I got home. Hey, is that your truck? Yeah, that's my truck. That's okay. Well, we thought somebody else lived here with a Toyota Tundra. I'm like, dodged him again. And so when we are facing our giants, we will do desperate things. And again, we'll either minimize our problems and say, well, you know what, I don't really have a problem drinking. I could stop anytime. Or I'm not really addicted to pornography. I can stop anytime. We're minimizing our giants. Or we're exaggerating. I can't do this. You're right. We can't. We cannot do this alone. But not David. David shows up, and all he does is start discussing God. The first time he steps on the stage of this battlefield, that's all he does is talk about God. Matter of fact, his first words he gets are in verse 37 with the king. He breathes a God-breathed announcement. Let's check it out, verse 37. First thing he says to the king is this. Again, that's 1 Samuel 17:37. David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, he will deliver me. He will deliver me. And it's the same thing for you. He will deliver you. He will deliver me. And he only says really 2 things about Goliath. Calls him a name. You uncircumcised Philistine, you're not going to prevail here. And he says, and you have gone against the God, the living God. He doesn't focus in on how big the Goliath is, the giant is. He doesn't do any of that. No exaggerating here. He just says, you have been mocking the God of Israel. The God of Israel. So again, David, all he is talking about God in this battle. See, no one else up to that point is really discussing God. And David discusses no one but God. No one but God in this battle. See, we start to see a theme here unfolding. God-focused versus giant-focused. See, it's all about a matter of where you're spending the majority of your time. Have you ever heard of the saying tunnel vision? Tunnel vision? You get so caught up in your giants, your issue, that all you see is, you don't see what's around you. And you become so overwhelmed of what's going on. But David is suggesting that we need to be God-focused in this story. See, they have all majored in Goliath, but David decided to major in God. He sees the giant, but he just chooses to see God more. He sees the giant, but he chooses to see God more. Let's look at his battle cry right before he goes into battle. Verse 45. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. And this day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head. And this day I will give your carcasses to the camp of the Philistines, to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth will know that there is a God in Israel. That there is a God in Israel. I want you to note something really quick. The plural there for the armies of Israel. I think that's pretty unique, because what I think it's saying about David is that he was again, not solely giant focused, but he realized that God was going to fight this battle. And God had dispatched all of heaven's armies to stand with him. But when we are so caught up on our struggles, on our issues, we tend to not see that God is waiting to come to our rescue, to fight our battles. And none of the others saw that either. Only David. He says it in a plural right there. The armies of Israel are going to fight. And you will be delivered. You will be delivered. When was the last time? And one unique thing here in verse 48. You know David has courage, because what does he do? He doesn't step back the moment he declares that he's going to go forward. What does he do? He charges the giant. He charges him because he knows God is on his side. He charges the giant. When was the last time you or I rushed our giant with a God-saturated soul and heart? See, David is a great model. God called him a man after his own heart. We see that multiple times. We see it in Acts 13:22. No one else has ever given that name. Not Abraham, not Moses. He called Paul an apostle. He called John the beloved, right? But he only called David a man after his own heart. Now, you know David's story, right? After this, the man, stumbled just as much times as he stood for what was right. He faced a giant, looked him in the eye, but then he oogled at Bathsheba and fell to her. Fell to her. But here's the beautiful thing. We can be encouraged by David's journey. We need this story because it shows us that the heart of God, that God loved, was a checkered one, like my heart. The heart God loved was a checkered one. See, giants lurk in our neighborhoods: rejection, failure, hurt, revenge, remorse. Giants. We have to face them. But the good news is we don't have to face them alone. Amen? Focus first on God. Focus first on God. See, the times that David did, the giants fell. The days he didn't, he fell. See, in the story, David makes only two statements about the giant. One to the giant himself, like I said earlier, and one to the king. Max Lucado says it like this in his book. There are 9 references about God in this story alone, and you can check it out. 9 references about God. God thoughts versus Goliath thoughts, 9-2. How does that ratio compare with you and your giants? Do you ponder God's grace 4 times as you ponder your guilt? Is your list of blessings 4 times longer than your complaints? Are you 4 times as likely to describe the strength of God as you are the demands of your day? Draw encouragement from David. See, when you focus on giants, you and I will stumble. But when we focus on God, our giants will stumble. You want to know why David was called a man after his own heart? Because every time David fell, he was quick to listen to the prompting of the Holy Spirit and to say, God, I have fallen. Against you and only have I sinned. Create in me a clean heart, O God. Renew a right spirit within me. Every time David fell, he would ask for repentance. He accepted the grace and the forgiveness of a loving God, and that's why Jesus said, he is a man after my own heart. He knows the love of a father. He knows the forgiveness and the grace that is waiting for him. So this morning I want to challenge you. Lift your eyes, you giant slayers. The God who made the miracle out of David stands ready to make one out of you. Your God is dependable.